I wanted to engage with the movie first and talk about the political context, but maybe it's nice to start with the question: what if Russia and Europe fell in love? Would we not all solve all of our problems? And maybe some views. And maybe start with you. What made you fall in love with it? And is there any hope for a love relation between the continents? Of Russia, which is in and of itself a very special case, and Europe.
I think that a marriage between the Netherlands and Russia would be a very bad marriage, because Russia would be the let's say the husband, and the Netherlands would be the wife in a very old-fashioned way, and I think that will be rather oppressive for us. So I think it's a very bad idea. And even if we would arrange a kind of Europe as a confederation, even in a confederation, you need some balance, and Russia is too big for us.
I like the way that you described it. I think also if you have a love relationship, then you accept the fact that somebody, maybe doesn't really clean the bathroom in the way that you want the bathroom to be cleaned. Just in general, not specifically in my personal case. But you accept certain differences, and you accept that maybe something at some point is not the way in which you like it. When we talk about, I think, international relations, especially like HONORATA mentioned, international law and the way in which you should interpret international law in your relations, I think you should always be on the same terms when you talk about international relations. And obviously, in this specific case of Crimea, Russia and many European countries do not agree on the international terms within the international law in which Russia has annexed the Crimea. So I think here there is no basis for a love relationship. There is a basis for a relationship because, let's be honest, many parts, especially in the west of Russia, are European. It's not maybe European as the Netherlands is European, but they are European, different kind of European, but they are European.
There are two main examples in history where Russian thinkers try to promote that kind of marriage. In the 19th century, I would mention Piotr Kropotkin. And the second famous anarchist, the second example was, of course, the Communist Revolution. The October Revolution. There were some people who were in favor of the October Revolution in the Netherlands, and the Communist Party of the Netherlands at that time was called the Communist Party of Holland, just 1 or 2 steps before merge with the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Anyhow, it didn't succeed, and perhaps it was not by accident. So I think we have to be more rational in our relationship with Russia.
HONORATA, of course, the third, but I want to take it also back a little bit to your speech in which you said there's 2 types of secession. One is unilateral, one is remedial. Unilateral doesn't apply. Remedial would be when there are violations, when there's like a very clear group, etc. You depicted it. This clip actually shows a lot of the Russianization of Crimea. Is that also the argumentation that led Russia to say, well, it is Russian, so obviously we can do this?
Yeah, that's for sure the argument that Russians would use, right? We Russified that place, but you have to also then look at the other groups that are actually still inhabiting Crimea. And they are pretty much ignored from this people's idea, and they are opposing the secession as well. So then you do not arrive in the end at the conception of one people.
And so what's the balance? What are the percentages currently?
Well, I don't know if percentages matter. I mean, we have to agree that minorities have to be protected as well, right? So that is so that's one thing. Okay, it's questionable. If you want to look at the numbers, of course, Russians are the majority currently, and we know why, because we saw that.
And a couple of years ago as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Already for many years, where basically since Stalin sent away most of the Tatars to Central Asia, and most of them died and never came back. Well, the population was mainly Russian in that area. But that's just one of the conditions. I think the other condition that is still very important, and I talked about, is that you have to try first all the other possible ways to actually find a solution with the government that governs that area at that point. And that has never happened.
And that's the Ukraine in and of itself.
That's Ukraine. Of course, Crimea had a special status. It was an autonomous region of Ukraine. It was not as autonomous as probably it would like to be. But again, that is something to negotiate with your own government.
I want to close the loop between the movie and your talk, and there's of course more in there. But one thing I missed is, isn't the international agreement that you are part of a country or you are a country when other countries recognize you as such?
Of course, that's another element. You have to have the recognition. So you have the Montevideo criteria, right? The population, the territory, etc. And then there is the other basis of being a state, or sovereign state, is the recognition.
And who recognizes?
Russia, and perhaps Russian friends like Nicaragua, right?
The main thing I think we can say, I would like to say about the movie and the introduction before, is that it shows a very big distinction between the way of thinking in Russia and Ukraine, by the way, because it was an Ukrainian movie, and the more legal point of view we heard in your introduction. And I'm afraid that Chancellor Merkel was right when she said that Putin is living in the 19th century, in a century where the national pride and the national rights are traced back in history, as if the Netherlands are still based on the work of the Roman writer Tacit, and that is, in a way, that is one of the diseases, I think, not only in Russia but also in Ukraine, where people are looking for the right to be a nation by this kind of discourse, to write down the numbers who were living then and then in that place, and are trying. Also, the filmmaker is trying to make an argument with this kind of historical traces. I think it's more important and it's more useful to talk about actual politics and actual history, and not to look for traces in the ancient times, and to pretend that you are right. You have the right to build a nation or to split a nation because someone in the 17th or 16th century wrote it in a book.
I was also wondering, Marit, so we see the historical part, we see the legal part, and then there's of course also the political part. And Europe, kind of, as in the very first picture with Obama being cut off the phone like cry me a river, so I don't really care, we kind of sat there and took it, didn't we? Why was that? Was there not enough political power to go against it, or were we just not clear on how we should feel about it when Russia invaded or took over Crimea? What was the discourse then in politics in Europe, and maybe also in the Netherlands specifically?
I think we in Europe were caught by surprise that it actually happened.
No way he's doing this.
No way he's going to do this, because it's against international law. It's not. It's against what we think in the way neighboring states should communicate with each other, and all these we think normal ways of communicating with each other in international law don't apply when you have this. I think you described it very well. When you have this historic, let's say, argument that gives you reasons to make statements and also actions nowadays from the past.
So we didn't have a response to that scenario on the shelf because we didn't see it coming.
We have different views of how to look at international politics. This is also what you see in, I think, in other in other crises right now. You see a number of countries with a more legalistic approach, and other countries with a more hard power historic approach.
My idea is that it didn't start in Crimea. It started long ago, I think, maybe in the ideology of Russia. There are the ways how Russia is achieving the goals, and there is a reason what kind of goals and why do they have these goals. So in my point of view, Russia has an old Soviet ideology, but the method of action is absolutely new with this hybrid war and so on. At the same time, they are very fast in decision making, and the decisions are absolutely unpredictable. So that's why Russia is becoming an issue and danger, maybe that's why they are strong in their actions. I'm not going to dive too deep to the history of relations between Russia and Georgia, but just to make a kind of a link, what we've seen now with the Georgian situation.
Mm-hmm.
What they've done, I mean, during the nearest, let's say, history. In 90s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, suddenly we discovered that we have an ethnic conflict inside the country, which we didn't have previously. So we need to see an actor who is acting there and whose interest is to create this kind of conflict in Crimea or in Abkhazia or South Ossetia. And Russians are very good playing on the feelings of ethnicity. These conflicts started in Georgia, in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Then Russians came as a peacekeepers. I don't know peacekeepers who are coming and taking part of a side, they started helping Abkhazians and South Ossetians with weapons. They were doing trainings for the troops. They were helping them during the war. So obviously they were not any kind of peacekeepers. Finally, what they've done, they expelled the vast majority of the population from those territories. The vast majority now they are IDPs. Those people,
It's internally displaced people.
internal displacement people, yes. And what kind of situation we have now? Then they announced those territories as independent countries, and they finalized the occupation of the territory. Then it followed with the passportization and so on, giving them Russian passports to increase the number of the population, Russian population, of course. And then they moved to annexation, another step. What was the annexation? They concluded agreements with puppet regimes in those occupied territories. So they concluded agreements to themselves because these regimes are controlled by Russians.
By themselves, yeah.
Yes.
So basically here you say, we've seen this movie before, it happened twice in Georgia already.
Absolutely. And they concluded this agreement on collaboration, integration, cooperation, and so on. What does it mean? They will have the common system of defense. They will have a common system of monetary policy. They will have the pensions, the salaries. Everything will be the common and the same now in Abkhazia and the South Ossetia. So this is another way of annexation of the territory. So we saw one story of annexation. I'm telling you another story, and we need to see the clear links between those annexations and why it's happening. Do you really think that the war between Russia and Georgia and war between Russia and Ukraine, was it really between Russia and Georgia, Russia and Ukraine? I think that the war is between Russia and democracy. There is a war between Russia and development. There is a war between Russia and uncorrupted system. This is a war between Russia and European values. And why? There is a question why. Why do they need to fight against this? Because we all know that Russia is far not a developed country. It's not, of course, a democratic country. They have a
Like
high
Georgia.
level.
Like Georgia.
Well, yes, Georgia at least trying to be developed. And
Already engaging with the audience.
Yes.
Can you close the answer? Because we need to go
Yes,
to
sure.
the audience as well.
Yes, sure. And finally, a couple of words. Why do they afraid of the developments in their neighborhood? Because they don't want to see success story. They don't want to see Europe in their neighborhood. And why? Because how Putin rules the country, it's absolutely incompatible. Because if there is a development, if there is a very bad example for his own people, One day maybe Russian people will demand from Putin, who also want to develop, who also want the democracy. So this is my idea. We need to look at this globally. Whose interest is to have this kind of problems in those republics? It's clearly not in the Georgia's interest to have those conflicts in Georgia. It's clearly not in the interest of Ukrainians to have this conflict. Somebody is very much interested to keep this conflict.
Okay. I think the point is very clear. Thank you very much also for being Mr. SURGULADZE.
Thank you very much for your explanation. I heard you say there started an ethnic conflict at the beginning that was not there. Afterwards you explained there are value contradictions between European or Georgian and Russian values, and also an internal question for Russia to have this conflict. But I'm interested also in the political and economic situation. Is it necessary for Russia to have buffer states to protect something? What is the external political situation? And what is the interest economically to have this, especially Georgia and Ukraine and Crimea, these states around it? And what is our Western interest in this situation?
First of all, I think there is a psychological issue at stake. I don't agree with Mr. Ambassador that Russia is still a Soviet state. Russia is an imperial state. At least Russia was an empire. And as we ourselves know in the Netherlands, losing an empire is a very, very serious and painful episode in a country's life history. It is really, for the Netherlands, I don't know how long, but I think 20, 30 years, a lot of people in the Netherlands were not in peace with the fact that we lost Indonesia. In France, they are still thinking that they have the right in France to protect l'Afrique francophone. Which also shows a bit how long a de-imperialization of an empire can last. That's one thing. The second thing, the money thing, the material thing, is also very important. We are not aware in the Netherlands, for example, not only in the Netherlands, of the effect of TTIP. In Russia, the idea of a European common market and in a connection with the American common market, merged in a way by the TTIP treaty, will create an immense market which cannot be penetrated by Russian enterprises at all. TTIP will create a standardization of the let's say the Atlantic economical sphere in a way which will be absolutely which will be a dangerous economical block for Russia, especially because on the southeast side they have China. So I think there are two things together mixing up the psychological problem of de-imperialization of an empire on the one side, and on the other side the fear for an economical bloc which will set the standards for the world and especially for Russia. That's the reason why they are so fond to pull out Ukraine from the European market.
But I'm also interested in that last part of it, the satellite state.
Yeah.
Is it kind of a Europe versus Russia way of, we want Ukraine as a satellite state, no, they want Ukraine as a satellite state, and a kind of an exchange in that sense, or is that not the kind of question on the table?
Well, I think the question about the buffer zones is a very good question, because it also shows the way in which you look at a country and in which you look at other countries. Do we think that Belgium is a buffer zone for the Netherlands? No, because it's a friendly neighboring country. So if Russia and, for example, Ukraine or Georgia would be friendly neighboring countries, you know, being larger or smaller, there would never be this question of buffer zones. The question of buffer zones comes into the play when you talk about economic powers, and when you talk about the relationship between economic countries that are unequal. And now I think when you talk about the European Union and Russia as two larger blocs, you see that the European Union and Russia right now are maybe involved in trying to find out who is the larger economic bloc on this part of the European continent or the Eurasia continent. And that's probably also something that triggers this whole debate about the buffer zone. For us as the European Union, I think it's extremely important that countries around Europe are countries that are friendly towards Europe and are countries that we can cooperate with in a normal way, that are countries that are stable, because that is also good for us. Stability around the European Union is good for stability inside the European Union.
The principle that Europe would like a friendly neighborhood and countries where they could do trade, because I would hope, because I see how Dutch private enterprise is suffering from all the sanctions to Russia, that we would have a policy towards all the parts of Russia that we can sell our cheese, that we can sell our materials, and that we can import the gas. So I would hope that this would be put in practice, but I see on the contrary that European foreign policy has been kidnapped by American foreign policy, that like we have done with the spring in the Middle East, provoking lentils everywhere, spring with all sorts of civil wars. This also happened in Ukraine, and I wonder why, what was our interest, what's my interest as a Dutch citizen that there is a civil war, they shot one plane, we won't hear who did it until after the referendum. What is my interest as a Dutch citizen, what has been done here in the Ukraine?
What's his interest as a Dutch citizen in having sanctions towards Russia?
I don't know. Perhaps his interest is rather small. But the principal idea of Peter is that the Maidan was provoked by the United States of America, and that the Europeans are kidnapped by the United States of America at the Maidan in Kiev. I beg your pardon for this rude language. That is bullshit. And I can explain why it's bullshit. Because it was a genuine civic protest against one of the most corrupt regimes in Europe, which was against a government that promised to sign an association treaty with the European Union, and all of a sudden, because the president was blackmailed as a head of state, or even as a person, by the president of the Russian Federation, with money and other benefits.
Yes, because all the
to retreat is fine. The main thing is, for you there is no interest, perhaps.
No.
But the main thing, I think, is that in Ukraine live 45 million people. So let's say there live more than 30 million citizens who have the right to vote. I think that is a serious state, and those citizens have the right also to determine their own fate. And perhaps it's not in your interest, but the days of the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie are far away. So we have to accept that in Ukraine they have the right to determine their own fate. That is my main objection to your...
Because when we talk about our relationship with Russia and the fact that also Dutch companies that want to have trade with Russia are affected negatively because of the sanctions, you blame the Americans. I think this is a very easy way of trying to make this argument, because if we would be normal friends, like I said before to the lady in the back, if you're normal friends, you don't need buffers. If we would be normal friends, the European Union and Russia, these sanctions would not have been in place. These sanctions would not have been in place. These sanctions were not in place before. So there was a game changer, and the game changer, here I think we disagree. The game changer, some people say, was the American influence on Maidan. I completely disagree. I think the game changer was the fact that there is a population in a country called Ukraine that wants to move forward. And many people in Ukraine are corrupt. I completely agree with you. But the only way to try and fight this corruption is to cooperate with them and to institution against corruption, and not to say, okay, we leave you to the Russians who are not corrupt, please. But we're not bringing the Ukraine into the European Union. We're not bringing the Ukraine into the European Union. Everybody who tells you that is lying.
Wait,
We're not
okay.
bringing the Ukraine into the European Union.
We are going to talk
Of
about the
course you-
association
no,
treaty.
sorry,
but-
I want to continue this argument.
But this is the
Sorry,
last
I'm not listening
subject.
to you either.
I'm going crazy.
Of course the Ukrainian president wants to. And he is allowed to want to, but it's not the reality at this time. And he knows it's not the reality at this time. It doesn't make the fact that he wants, no, if you want to be an astronaut, it's good, you can wish to be an astronaut, but it's not going to be the reality at this moment. If we look at the relationship,
to do the work for
if we look at the relationship between Europe and the Ukraine right now, and if we look at the position of Ukraine right now, corruption, you rightfully say, they are not ready to be a member of the European Union. But I would like to support the people in the Ukraine that want to move forward, that want to fight against corruption, that want to have more human rights, that want to have more democracy, step by step. It's not going to happen overnight. They're not going to be member of the European Union.
HONORATA, I saw you, you had some slides with you with the voting behavior in different areas of Ukraine. And I think that's quite interesting to hear about, because we've had discussions in the news about the self-determination, and it also came up, of the Ukrainian people. Can you give us a little overview of what are the political powers there, and how do the different regions in the Ukraine vote?
This is a very difficult question because the situation is basically changing constantly, right? We had the crisis in the parliament recently, Yatsenyuk was saved miraculously, and actually there is a growing disparities within the coalition in the government at the moment. But I think what is important to say, and I think it's sometimes missing also in the media in the Netherlands, and I can see that as, let's say, an outsider, is that actually the divisions are not that 100% of people in eastern Ukraine always voted pro-Russian versus 100% of Ukrainians in western part of Ukraine voted pro-Europe. That is completely untrue, and this is a misleading effect of showing the maps with lines, and one side is blue, the other side is red.
It's very mixed, isn't it?
It's very mixed. So when you looked at the results of the elections for the Party of Regions, so Yanukovych, of course, he won the regions in the east of Ukraine, but he won with 50-something%. So you have still 40-something% of the population that does not vote on that party. So you cannot say that the decision can be made by this particular group that is actually voting for the Party of Regions.
But so just as a conclusion, because we talk about the self-determination, but there's a majority that was pro-European during the time that they wanted to have
well, in the elections, of course, after the Maidan,
yes.
so in 2014, the elections brought the powers that are pro-European to the government.
Okay.
And the new party that was basically created after Yanukovych left, so the opposition bloc, so-called, they are in the opposition at the moment in the parliament.
Okay.
Ukraine is a very large country, and if we talk about east and west, and we talk about the areas Lugansk, Donetsk, often if we don't have this map in front of us, we think this is the whole of the east. But these two areas, the areas where the civil war is going on, it is maybe, if you compare it to the Netherlands, the size of the south of Limburg. So it's not that the whole of the east of the country, the whole, it's not 60% of the country. Six. Well, look how big Limburg is. No, it's not the whole of the country. You rightfully say it's 6% of the country. So we should also, if we look in the Netherlands, if we talk in debates about the east and the west of the country and the civil war in the east, it's in the far, far east.
May I complicate the situation?
Oh,
Yes.
just what we needed.
I would like to complicate the situation, because the issue is not only who is in favor of the association treaty with Europe, but also who would like to go back under the umbrella of Russia. And these are the latest polls, January this year. 53% of all Ukrainians want to sign an association treaty with the European Union. Only 17% would like to go back under the Moscow umbrella. The people who would like to go back in the old situation under the protection of Russia are decreasing in amount. The people who are looking forward to Europe are not increasing, but they are more or less stable above 50%. Even in the east, in Donbass, only 33% of the population, according to this poll of January, would like to be under the protection of the Russian Federation.
Yeah.
So it's not only
That's great.
so it's not only in Ukraine. It's not only at stake in what direction they want, but also in what direction they don't want.
Right. Okay, so there are two questions, and one that we're going to keep for specifically the association treaty conversation. One is the international, so the trade agreement between Russia and China, and also between Europe and the States. Is there what's the importance of Crimea in that respect? And the other one was the idea of the buffer zones, that they need to have like a mutual function. Who wants to pick up either of those questions?
I just want to say one thing, that we are very often talking pretty much in some kind of realist rhetoric of the great powers fighting for influence, etc., etc. Well, the Netherlands pretty much is one of the greatest countries economically in the world, with one of the biggest tax havens, etc., etc., having impact on many countries around the world.
Don't talk about that.
Just controversial statement, but we can bring it a little bit down to countries that are slightly smaller economically, politically, in great power terms, such as Georgia, such as Poland, such as Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, etc. They have also, a right to exist still under international law, and also still have the right to enter economic relations how they want to enter them, and they also have the right to actually determine their political system. So I would try to also think a little bit in the terms of, okay, we are trying to think EU, US, China, and Russia, but there are also countries in between there. And we are very often forgetting about that. And I think this is what is coming very often here back in the conversation, that we are just thinking about some kind of economic interest of the great power, and then we are forgetting that actually developing other countries is also in our interest.
Yeah. Is this comparable to, okay, we have to approach Ukraine just like we did the Baltics, Finland, other countries that used to be in the influence of Russia? If you look at the buffer zones, is that a relevant?
But then you're going back to history, and I think we have to move forward. If we look at the situation right now, we see that these countries themselves, the populations of these countries, elected to be part of the European Union,
right.
Elected to be a democratic system with human rights. Yes, they elected to have human rights in their system and have a democratic system. And I think if you look at countries like Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, if they elect, and I think we all agree that maybe the level of democracy, human rights and corruption is not really at the level that maybe the European standards will be, but if the people of these countries elect to work towards democracy, to work towards a country with less corruption, with more human rights, it is their choice. It's not up to us to tell them that they should not have that choice.
So there's this question about the relevance of Crimea in this global geopolitical game where you have different powers moving. We look at something like historical facts of this small part of a relatively small country, but it could be very relevant. What is the relevance? Could you give an estimation, Hubert, maybe on what Crimea is doing to us in that sense?
Yeah, can I just maybe,
before
sure. Hubert starts, if you look at the relationship between China and Russia, I have worked and lived in China for 4 years. For China, Crimea is not relevant. It's meddling into internal affairs.
Right.
For them, the relationship between Beijing and Moscow is much more important than small areas, because they do think in the same way, in their historic right as a country that has 5,000 years of history in the area with buffer zones. They think in the same way. So for them, Crimea is, I think, unfortunately, irrelevant.
The relevance of Crimea is only symbolic. But perhaps it's important. It's an important symbolic relevance for us in the West. On the other side, I don't know how relevant Russia is for China. It is not by accident that the so-called Silk Route, which is revitalized and is now beginning to function, that the Silk Route is not a route through Russia, but through the Central Asian former Soviet republics. And there is only one, I don't know how to say it in English, there is only one little line from the Silk Route to Moscow. And as we all know, the line is not a profitable railroad. So I think that one of the tragedies, but no doubt, Europe, the West, have made a lot of mistakes the last 25 years vis-à-vis Russia. A lot of mistakes on the psychological level, on the economical level, on the political level, no doubt. I think we don't understand the frustration of the loss of the empire in Russia. Really, we think that they have to grow up as we did after I don't know when. But one of the tragedies of Russia, I think, at this moment is that they lost their dialogue position with the West, and they haven't yet a real position vis-à-vis China, because China is a bit bigger than Russia. The Russia is big in square meters, but Russia is economically not a big country. And that is, I think, one of the main things you can blame Putin. He came to power 15 years ago with a very good program, manifesto. He promised the Russian people to reform the structure, the basis of the Russian economy. He didn't deliver. He was living and he was spending his money as we were spending our money when we were infected by the Dutch disease, as it is called in Russia. Living from your
natural
resources and spend your money without any strategic goal. That is the main thing you can blame Putin. You cannot blame him that he is not a Democrat, but I blame him, if I would have been a Russian citizen, that he didn't deliver what was promised in 2000. And that is the tragedy of Russia at this moment.
How do we solve the Crimea case? Is it this year? Is it in 10 years? Can it ever be solved? We heard the word stalemate already. How do we solve it? Then we're going to go back to the audience. So, do you have any views on how this is going to be resolved?
I think that the West already have given up Crimea.
We have given up.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And just a fact.
An applause for your realism, or optimism. You agree, HONORATA?
Well, I think this is really a pragmatic assessment of what is going on. And there are, of course, idealistic ways to solve it, but then you need two parties at the table, and that is not going to happen. Russia is not going to negotiate about Crimea at all. And as long as we don't have that, well, maybe if a Russian leader changes.
But if you change the framing of your answer into, okay, we don't have this, but what wouldn't be necessary for us to resolve the issue?
Well, actually a negotiation partner. That's what's needed, right? We have to have two parties willing to talk about the topic. But if one party decided this is part of our country, and the other says, well, it's actually a part of another country, and they cannot come to the table together about this issue.
So we have to stay the course in the Donbass, because that is our, I think,
so you have
our leverage, the Western leverage.
To prevent the continuation of this policy, of course, you have to start treating Russia seriously when they endanger other territories of other countries, which didn't happen in the case of Crimea.
HONORATA gave the correct answer. As long as there are not, there is no dialogue between two partners that want to come to a common solution and that are open in that dialogue, there's no way of starting a dialogue on a solution, and I'm quite sure that we're not going to have a military solution.
The European Union actually has made a lot of mistakes during the last 25 years towards Russia, which you have actually don't listen or hear often from media or from people. I really appreciate that. Could you please mention some of these mistakes which has been made by the European Union towards Russia?
We made a laughing stock out of Boris Yeltsin. That was a psychological mistake. But the main mistake in this area, what we are now discussing is this. For us, the association treaty with Ukraine was a technical discussion. It was a discussion about technicalities. So, how about standards, about all kind of things that we perceive in the West as ordinary. We didn't understand how the last few years, when we started with the Eastern Partnership, that for the Russian Federation, our technicalities are political issues. That what we think is a technical discussion about enlargement, about standardization, etc., etc., about tariffs and so on and so on, is for Russia political issue. And that is, I think, the main mistake we in the European Union made. We didn't take the association treaty with Ukraine serious enough. We thought it was just as any association treaty with any potential partner of the European Union. So that, I think, is the main mistake. We were living on a technical level, and in Russia they perceived our technicalities as political issues. Okay. And though we are living on two planets.
One thing in the context here which is important, which we haven't mentioned yet, is NATO. That for Russia, maybe European Union is not that important. NATO is much more important, and the relationship between the European countries and NATO is, the European countries in NATO and Ukraine is probably for some Russians equal to the European Union and an economic relationship to the Ukraine, which it's not. So this is not the hang yourself answer to your question, but it's probably what is perceived also on the other side.
One more addition to that mistake conversation. I'm not a politician, so I can say something. Well, actually, when you think about Russia, the whole blaming of the West is linked very much to the 1990s, and that's also the NATO and the Eastern European, before satellite states or members of the Soviet Union joined NATO, but also because Russia was going through enormous crisis. So they went into the process of democratization and also freeing of their market with big hopes. They received actually also a lot of help from the West to devise plans for opening their market, from Jeffrey Sachs and others when we think about scholars and Western help. So here Americans, not necessarily the EU. And they didn't see anything better happening. So Russia as a society came out deeply impoverished from this transition period.
And disappointed.
And disappointed with how, what the West promised them, in a sense of the Western idea of development. If you think about 1998, the collapse of the Russian economy, the inflation, and actually still feeling the consequences of that, this is what Russians also associate with the Western idea.
It's a good point, but what was not here in discussion yet, it was that NATO is the issue why Crimea annexation happened by Russia. Because what happened is when the Orange Revolution came, then Russia was very surprised it happened and felt it like a danger to their own policy. Already at that time Ukraine was collaborating with NATO a little bit. There were exercises on Ukrainian ground with NATO forces, small ones, but it happened. And then they happened, hey, we're going to lose control, maybe Ukraine will now be a member of the NATO. That was a very scary view for Russia. Then they came back to the Russian, more favorite Russian politicians in Ukraine came back to power again, Yanukovych, and then, but it happened again, another revolution, and that's why they already had these plans in Russia to take over Crimea. They happened, hey, now it will happen again. Then maybe now it will really happen against NATO, and then the NATO ships, American ships, will also come into line in Sevastopol next to ours. And that was something that Putin couldn't accept, and that's why he took it. Because Crimea, he doesn't care about the population.
Thank you very much for that. So the idea would be that somebody is going to have to pay for the lost trade with Russia, because Russia stopped the economic relations with Ukraine after they entered, which they did, by the way, since January 1st, into the association treaty with the EU. What are your views on that? It's kind of a primed question, so who is going to pay for it already assumes that somebody is going to pay, but what happens with that lost money, with that lost trade?
And that somebody is to blame, because if you look at a country like Iceland, that is part of the European trade area, they have a free trade agreement with China. We don't. There is a possibility to have this kind of agreements bilaterally, even if you are within the European trade agreement. You started by saying Europe put the Ukraine in this position. I keep on disagreeing. It is a choice of the Ukrainian population to have this agreement. And we, I think, also as European countries, would like to work with the Ukraine under this agreement.
Explain that this treaty has also a military paragraph to it.
Security
It presumes military cooperation between Ukraine and European Union. So maybe
It has a
comment on
security.
that.
It has a security paragraph, not a military paragraph.
Well,
No,
So-
but that's a difference.
Yeah.
It's a real
There's a-
difference. It's a nice argument by Harry van Bommel, but it's
Crimea, of course, is a questionable area in terms of international law. In the association treaty, we speak about the borders, like our outer borders, and also about security cooperation. Is there any relation between the Crimea question and the security cooperation in the treaty? Do these touch each other?
There's a paragraph that is about the foreign common and security policy, also of the European Union.
Yes.
And in this paragraph, we have these associations with other countries. If in the international terms, for example, in a discussion in the United Nations, certain elements of foreign policy are being discussed, we ask countries that have treaties with us to see if we can be aligned. That's the issue. So it's not, I mean, let's say the feeling that comes with military is that you see boots on the ground and that you see, you know, NATO-like cooperation taking place under the umbrella of the European Union. This doesn't even take place between the 28 member states of the European Union under the umbrella of the European Union. We have cooperation with Belgium and with Germany and with the UK because we have bilateral cooperation between our armies between those countries, but not because there is a European defense policy that is so well developed that we have this under the European umbrella.
So that's not in the association treaty.
No, it's what Harry van Bommel likes us to feel, but it's not there.
It's under the umbrella of NATO, that's that for sure.
Yes.
Because we are talking we know what the people want in Ukraine. There was a referendum, so they can choose for that government or for that European system. That is not there, not yet. So we have to take care about the people and the society what they want. Which part of the country, is it only in Kiev or around the country? I only want to say that there's a warning as a comment. My question is, in relation to this, most of the people are very, very scared about what is happening. What's happening.
Ukrainian people.
Will
Okay,
the conflict, European people are still scared. What will happen? What will happen with the big neighbors, including America? But the people in Ukraine, they want to get rid of corruption and want to have human rights. And my question is, as board member of Platform Netherlands Ukraine, how can we assure, as Europe, as EU, in relation to the trade agreement, there's only a small part of the trade agreement, that we give those people our human rights, without corruption, without oligarchy, without corruption system, etc. How do we cut that?
I think we have to be very clear that, of course, this change doesn't take from today to tomorrow. But there is a cooperation between the European Union and Ukrainian institutions. There is an institution, anti-corruption institution, that was installed in the Ukraine. It doesn't mean that corruption is gone. It means that we are taking steps towards fighting corruption. There are institutions for human rights. I think Ukraine, at least, has a number of non-governmental organizations that we would like to support. I think Ukraine is more than only Kiev. And if you go all the way to the east, you know, to cities where not so long ago the Dutch national team, when it could still participate in European championships, was participating, you could see that these cities also have, you know, they want to have a vibration towards the west. What I find very difficult here is that we say that we think what the Ukrainian population wants. The only thing that I can listen to is some of the opinion polls that you see, young people that you see. I think young students, young people that want to start a company in the Ukraine, apart from the oligarchs who are, ruling the corrupt institutions in the country. I think we want to support those people and we want to help them to come to a country that at least has sort of a level playing field on human rights, on democracy, but also for economic interventions and for economic investments.
One of the arguments of the anti association treaty camp in the Netherlands is that we are pulling in corruption in the Netherlands. I would like to say that the corruption is already in the Netherlands, and it had nothing to do with the association treaty. When you go to Alexanderstraat 23 in The Hague, you see the trust firm where Mako Holding is registered. And Mako Holding is the business of Yanukovych, who has saved his money in a legal way in the Netherlands because he do trust Dutch civil right, civil law more than his own civil law in Ukraine. The same you can say about Akhmetov. His holdings are registered in Bergen-op-Zoom and Schiphol. I forgot the others. But anyhow, corruption is already inside the Netherlands because we don't only give tax havens for U2 and the Rolling Stones, but also for Akhmetov and Yanukovych. That's first. Second, I would like to add something to what you said. I would like to present to you a little neo-Marxist argument in favor of the association treaty. Okay. The discussion inside Ukraine is, of course, depends on East or West, etc., etc. But the main division in Ukrainian society, I think, is high educated, high potential population, or low educated workers in, let's say, in industries that are not ready to survive in the fourth industrial revolution. When I was last summer in Kharkiv, you could say that you could see, and you could say after that, that the higher educated people were in favor of the association treaty and the low educated people were afraid for the association treaty. So there is a kind of class struggle going on in Ukraine. And I even would like to add that even the language question, there is no language question in Ukraine, by the way. Kiev is a Russian-speaking town. Still.
And Ukrainian speaking.
And Ukrainian, yes, but let's say when I'm going to the hairdresser, they speak with each other Russian and not Ukrainian, which is, I think, is a sign. But you could say that even the language question is a class struggle question. Higher educated are ready and able to speak different kind of languages. On a lower level of society, they have more problems with it. And that's logical because the Donbass, where everything started 2 years ago, not all started, but the main war started in the Donbass. There, let's say, you could say, there is still a kind of Soviet society living. And that Soviet society cannot survive, and they know it themselves quite well. But they are living in a kind of myth. For example, miners in the Donbass think that their colleagues in Rostov earn 4 times more. The fact is that there are no mines anymore in Rostov. They are closed. So they have reason to be afraid for, let's say, European capitalism and what's going on when, let's say, the markets are coming in. But in the end, they have to accommodate their industries and also they accommodate their own level of education. So there is a class struggle going on in Ukraine, and we in the West are part of it.
I don't think that there is much to say against the association agreement at this stage. This is an association that gives hope to those who were fighting in Maidan and who lost their lives there because they were fighting actually mainly against corruption. That was the main reason. And they were fighting for trying to get rid of this corruption through the association with Europe, after all. And I also think that what you are talking about, these inequalities within society and different perceptions, also has something to do with the information. So there is very little information to those who will be in the worst situation or are actually constantly in the worst of situation. about how this association agreement could help them, whereas Russia has very good, machines of information that tell them how Russia will benefit them. And that there will be losers and winners. This is something that we have learned. If you don't do anything about these people, they will be the losers and they will be constantly dissatisfied with it. You learn that in Poland, we actually suffer now with our changes, political changes in Poland because of that, because there are losers of the transition that are not being reached out to by those who are more progressive.
Also East and West, by the way.
Also Poland A and Poland B, how we refer to that, not correct.
North Pole, South Pole, is that?
No, East and West. That's Poland. So I think what has to happen is finding a way to give hope to more people in Ukraine, rather than just to small, educated elites.
Okay.